Good afternoon. Have a bit of a cold, so I may have to drink that a little bit today. My name is Raymond Phillips. I am a resident of Sudbury. I'm also the president of Protect Sudbury. I'm honored to represent the over 3,000 citizens from Sudbury, Stowe, Marlborough, and Hudson who have come together over the past 4 years to protect the health and safety of our communities and conservation lands. We do not support the tentative decision reached by the Siting Board. There's ample evidence in the record to show that this transmission line is not necessary. But you have chosen to ignore the case record, much in the same fashion Eversource did with their flawed root scoring model. You know the answer you want, and you cherry pick the information to support from the case record to support it. Even assuming for a moment that this line is needed, you know that there are real and viable alternatives that do not permanently harm our communities. That being the case, you can still vote no to this transmission line with clear conscience. It's really that simple. We could all go home knowing that the EFSB would have done its job, made the best decision for the people of this Commonwealth. However, since this process is apparently biased in favor of the corporation, I would like to remind you of our concerns that we, the stakeholders, the communities and residents, the electric ratepayers, the people who live in the affected communities, the people who are in this room, who were in this room earlier today, have clearly expressed over the last 4 years. There are two options available to you which will do no harm to our communities: the National Grid Upgrade solution and the All Under Street solution. Both provide a reliable source for the Commonwealth with a minimal impact on the environment at the lowest possible cost. The proposal in front of you is for a high voltage transmission line is quite simply the wrong approach in the wrong place at the wrong time. It is, however, the right time for companies such as Eversource, who still use 19th century technologies, solutions, to solve 21st century demands. By recognizing energy consumption, the reduction in energy consumption is real and will continue. This realization is necessary in order to embrace the changes that are needed. Utility companies like Eversource need to learn how to think out of the splice box in order to design, build, and truly modernize the grid. And just as Eversource discovered in their Northern Pass proposal, plowing a hole through communities for what amounts to a very expensive extension cord is a bad idea. And just like the Northern Pass, slicing through 9 miles of residential, commercial, and historic areas, as well as 3,000 acres of protected conservation land in our communities, is an equally bad idea. And these are the same conservation wetlands, that protect our communities from flooding, which we believe will get worse as climate change continues. So there's a lot at stake. Fortunately for the residents of New Hampshire, their siting board made the appropriate decision to deny the high voltage transmission line solely on the threat to the environment because it was the right thing to do. The failure of Eversource to follow ISO New England processes and notify ISO that the approved project and the approved cost was not what was submitted to the EFSB is an important step that Eversource is well aware of. This fact alone should require a no vote today because the petition in front of you is not the petition that was proposed and approved by ISO New England. Eversource staff members themselves acknowledged this requirement when the town of Sudbury requested that an under-street route be considered early in the process. And by the way, at that time, Eversource was planning on submitting in its petition its petition without even having a geographically diverse route. It wasn't until we contacted you and asked if they needed to have a geographically diverse route that you told them that they had damn well better do it. And that's why there is an under-street route. They were prepared to give us one choice. A fundamental, in an attempt to remove the under-street route from the town's consideration, Eversource told town officials that they were selected over National Grid on the basis of an overhead design. But if the project changes and goes underground, it will need to go back before the ISO for reapproval. And so it should. It should go back to the ISO for this and other reasons, including the fact that Eversource failed to include the forecasts used for N-1-1 testing and incorporate reasonable amounts of solar energy and efficiency. It includes the fact that Eversource proposed routes based on biased and faulty route scoring, and includes the fact that numerous national and state environmental agencies, all experts in issues related to the environment, strongly disagree with statements Eversource has made regarding the amount of potential environmental damage and possible mitigations. Your tentative decision appears to dismiss the National Grid option without fair consideration. And all we ask of you is that you take a more studied look at it. The town of Sudbury has been an ardent supporter of rail trails. We voted overwhelmingly to fund and support the development of the Bruce Friedman Rail Trail, and recently backed a bill filed by Senator Eldridge, who spoke earlier, and Representative Gentile, to allow community preservation funds to be used for rail trail development. Folks, we are the leaders in rail trail development, okay? Let the record show that our town supports rail trails, provided they don't come with transmission lines. We ask that you do your job at the Energy Facility Siting Board and consider the transportation line on its own merits, as that is what's being proposed, a 9-mile transmission line through the heart of our communities. A vote to approve this project would confirm our fear that this body is not listening to the concerns of 4 communities, and it's just simply a rubber stamp for Eversource to get whatever they want, whenever they want it. The Eversource high voltage transmission line presents a real threat to the water supplies of Hudson and Sudbury. We asked you to consider what your vote will mean to our water supply. Hudson's Cranberry Bog well was closed due to PFAS contamination located within the right-of-way. This is contamination that I couldn't even find referenced in the 1,000-page report that Eversource said contained all of the possible sites for contamination. And yet 6 months ago, we found out that a good portion of the population in Hudson's being poisoned by this chemical that exists, and it's still there today. The town of Hudson has taken and has spent millions of dollars trying to remediate this, and has had to deliver water to residents because they can't drink it and they can't bathe in it. This problem is real. If this project is allowed to continue, it will awaken contaminants that are already mobile and spread them far and wide across the entire aquifer, producing a whole new set of unintended consequences. This siting board, must strive to base a decision on knowledge and factual information. I think you'd all agree with that. This is critical to making informed decisions in a way that distinguishes the technical from the political, and adjusting those decisions in the light of new evidence if it becomes available. While it may feel comfortable to lean on, that's just the way we've always done things, that is not sufficient, And that's the kind of thinking that puts us in harm's way. The line's not needed. The data is all there. You can see for yourself the dramatic documented downward trend in energy consumption. Yet despite the fact that almost 2,000 megawatts of behind-the-meter solar is unaccounted for in demand forecasts used by EverSource, and the 2017 CELT and data and the draft of the 2018 CELT, data reveals that net load conditions continue to decline while energy efficiency and demand responses continue to grow. The town's request to reopen the record was dismissed by the siting board. You have the opportunity today to insist that ISO consider the data, this important data, by ordering an ISO PP4 review. The tentative decision leans heavily on stakeholder input and reaching out to the community, done by EverSource. In fact, if that were true, we wouldn't be here today, would we? The people in this room and their children, and the children who raised money through running lemonade stands to support their neighborhoods and the environmentally sensitive conservation land are your stakeholders. What is omitted from the tentative decision is what we have said all along. EverSource and the EFSB both fail to acknowledge the virtually universal opposition to this project across 4 communities, as well as the opposition from local, state, federal officials, and national, regional environmental organizations. Is that not enough? Apparently all that is fallen on deaf ears. The tentative decision ignores substantive and valid input from we the people. It ignores the details of extensive discussions held between Protect Sudbury, EverSource, and the overwhelming information presented by the towns. And Protect Sudbury during this case regarding the harm that the construction would result in. Perhaps even worse is the siting board turning a blind eye to the discussions that occurred between DCR and EverSource in 2012. This is when stakeholder involvement was most important. It's not important after a decision has been made. In fact, I believe the primary reason the transmission line was sited in a greenfield right-of-way with maximum environmental impact when compared to other alternatives was in fact the backroom deal between the Department of Conservation and Recreation, perhaps it should be renamed to the Department of Recreation, and EverSource. The right-of-way had nothing to do with cost and reliability, that right-of-way, and certainly not environmental impact. Incredibly, the siting board even doubles down on this arrangement to defend its tentative decision when it erroneously says if construction of the rail trail is assumed, many of the environmental impacts associated with the project would occur, regardless of the project construction. Now you think about that for a minute. Nothing could be further from the truth. Anyone who could do a minimum amount of investigation of rail trails and how they're built understands that rail trails cap potential contaminants. They do not dig them up. They do not dig them up. They do not take the chance of mobilizing these contaminants and allowing them to get into the groundwater. Far too much time was spent in this decision discussing the rail trail that EverSource claimed it wasn't building, and precious little time in looking at whether this project was actually needed. And far too little time quantifying the danger of the extensive contamination along the 9-mile right-of-way. I think I recall 2 pages related to the needs analysis in a 264-page decision that took 18 months to deliver. This decision mentions DCR no less than 27 times. And you state that rail trail piggybanking is in no way factored into the decision. If it does not, and it should not, then please review and revise the decision without the red herring attached. Ratepayers, all of us speaking to you today ask why millions of dollars of construction costs that are completely unnecessary to the operation of a high voltage transmission line can legally be passed on to ratepayers. Eversource admits, for the record, that certain construction activities are primarily for the benefit of the DCR, and that these lower construction cost alternatives, and that lower construction alternatives are available to them. So they're spending incremental dollars because it's necessary for DCR. These unnecessary costs will be unfairly and possibly illegally borne by us, the people sitting in front of you today, all of us, the electric ratepayers, as a hidden tax. The Department of Utilities has no justification for passing these costs on to the electric ratepayer, and we ask you not to do so. The people here today are those who cared enough to take a day off from work, who cared enough to leave aging parents so they could be here, and who found daycare for their children, so that we could speak with you directly. And we're just like you, regular people, trying to do the right thing for our families, for the community and the environment. The EFSB was put in place to provide a level playing field for communities like ours, not to cater to the wishes of a corporation without a conscience. We ask you to open your minds and open your hearts to what we're saying today. The environmental risks are real, and they have been recognized by the Siting Board. The one I want to focus on in my remaining time is the real and present threat to the water supplies of the 18,000 residents of Sudbury and the 20,000 residents of Hudson. Both towns get their drinking and bathing water from municipal wells. Wells that are dependent upon the aquifers that the high voltage transmission line would cut through. Hudson, in my comment filing, notes that based on the company's own groundwater hydrology assessments completed for the project, soil in the area of the MBT right-of-way is highly permeable, heightening vulnerability of its public water supplies. There is no dispute that the environmental damage will be greater on the right-of-way than the other routes. The uncertainty before us is the full extent of the contamination of the impact of digging a 5-foot by 5-foot trench for 9 miles into the groundwater of Sudbury and Hudson's aquifers, as well as placing 30 by 30 splice vaults into the groundwater table. In the record, Eversource admits that it may encounter currently unidentified contamination from the MBTA right-of-way's previous use. Are we worried? Of course we're worried. Sudbury has very real experience with contamination, water supply contamination. A former Raytheon facility adjacent to the right-of-way contaminated a well in Sudbury that's 2 miles away from it. The water travels. The groundwater travels. I think we all know how that process works. So we don't take this threat lightly. Eversource has absolutely no basis to conclude that that rail bed is safe since no testing has been done. There is no way to know that all the we have no way to know about what the contamination is, how much there's there, and what the impact on our water supplies will be. And so for the Siting Board, I say this is simply a bridge too far to cross. So to conclude, there are 3 qualities that appear to inform what we think of as good decision making: knowledge, courage, and humility. Of course, these qualities don't guarantee that the right decision will always be made. Knowledge can only go so far. Once the facts have been established as best they can, then comes the decision to act. And in energy policy, as with other policies, all actions have side effects and unintended consequences. There are situations in which even the best analysis does not provide enough certainty to render making a decision easy. And so often, it's tempting to kick the can down the street and make it someone else's problem. But this is precisely the point at which the siting board members must draw on the second quality, which is courage. I'm asking all of you today, each of you today, to have the courage to recognize that in this hotly contested case, that while you may feel there are legitimate arguments to be made on both sides of this issue, there are far too many unknowns than there are knowns. The risk of approving a project that may not be needed is too great. The risk of permanently destroying the environment and endangering the health and safety of people that live in these communities is even greater. The Siting Board of New Hampshire went against the wishes of Governor Sununu and had the political courage to vote in favor of the people and the environment. Do you have this same courage? The third quality, humility, comes from the recognition that the power and responsibility held by public servants are not boundless, but they are derived from the mandate conferred on them, which provides the guidance for decision making and sets the limits of action. In this case, that mandate is to determine if the project is clearly the superior solution among all of the alternatives in terms of need, reliability, and environmental impact. We believe that we have proven beyond a reasonable doubt that this project should not be approved. Eversource has totally disregarded the community in its decision-making process, notwithstanding its recognition that the stakeholder input and feedback are important components. In the same way the ISO New England process was ignored, which is required for this project. Eversource overlooked the collective, vehement opposition of host towns, communities, stakeholders. In short, the company marginalized the towns, the community as a whole, and concerned statepayers. This failure to appropriately value community and stakeholder support undermines the company's conclusions that, quote, there were clear advantages to constructing the project under the MEDA corridor. We ask the EFSB to reject this petition.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips. Thank you, Mr. Phillips. Are there any questions for the individual? Thank you. I see